Masam Jimmy Jero, Baraj, Maji, Menga, Nangango, Soso Rangi, Yishi, Matusu, Yumla, Chata, no, Yendu Jio, Zono, Kunshi, Niji, Yeshi, Jenza, Dondala, Pamaj, Lamshi, Niji, Jiden, Dendu, Zaba, Kanda, Yanda, Nembe, Tuna, Namo, Gunda, Nazon, this. Yendu Janju, Sembe, Soja, Sanji, Kini, Yumdala, Chata, lo. Kagi tenji rewa zhu gagwa mewa gen mewa chewa mewa dang mewa wang mewa zhub tate zhimi tenji mi zhiba nishi shiden wa zobe sanje man tamba de la cha ze lo Kagi du zi yi sun de dawa du zhiba be zhi dambe chen de tenzi be kwa dam de la cha ze lo
Gautama, who, moved by his compassion, taught the sacred Dharma to rid us of all misconceived views. So we have the monks from the Theravada tradition and also the Korean Dhamma brothers and sisters who are the followers of the Sanskrit tradition. So in other words, all of us gathered here are followers of the Gautama, the Buddha. So almost all of Asia is the followers of the Gautama Buddha. So from India to Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, and so forth, the Buddhism spread, and also to Vietnam, China, Korea, and Japan. So all these countries and others, in all these countries, the Buddhism spreads. And then there's also Mongolia. So, in other words, the whole of Asia, almost the whole of Asia, is the follower of the Buddha. There are many different religious traditions in the world. So, as I say, usually, as I always say, all these religious traditions teach the practice of love. So when it comes to practicing love, practice of patience and tolerance, contentment, self-discipline, all these also are shared practices together with love. And therefore, all the world's religious traditions are benefited by their respective religious traditions through their practice. But the difference is, as I said earlier, in Asia, in Asian countries, all of the Asian continent, the Buddhism which has spread there, Buddhism is different in terms of philosophical ideas, whereas in the case of most of the religious traditions, they believe in a creator God, whereas Buddhism does not believe in a creator God. The Buddha himself has said, "You are your own master." So what kind of experience, good or bad, you may have is dependent on your actions of body, speech, and mind. So it's in your hands. The Buddha himself has said that I have shown you the path to liberation, but liberation is in your hands. And therefore, though I have taught you or shown you the path to liberation and omniscience, but whether you attain that or not is in your hands. So when it comes to attaining liberation or nirvana, It has nothing to do with seeking something from outside, but you have to attain it from within your mind, So because we are bound by karma and mental afflictions, we have suffering. So when you are free yourself from karma and these delusions, then that is the state of liberation that has to do with your mind. And these have to be overcome through the application of the antidotes. And therefore, we should understand that these defilements that are in our mind, the negativities and so forth, are something that can be overcome and eliminated from our mind, and also so that we reach liberation. And then also the residual stains, what are known as obscuration to knowledge. When that is overcome and eliminated from your mind, then you are able to see everything as it is in one instant, and therefore that state is called omniscience. And so these two, liberation and omniscience, must come through your effort. As Uttaratantra says, the Buddha's blessings radiate all the time, and the emptiness or the final nature of the mind of sentient beings and the Buddhas have no difference. And that's because the sentient beings have the Buddha nature, and therefore they have the essence of Buddha. And so what this means is the compassion of all the Buddhas radiates to all sentient beings all the time. And so the source of blessings from the Buddhas is always there. And then on the other hand, it also means that you have the potential for enlightenment within yourself. So, and then the emptiness nature of the mind itself also is within yourself. So that suchness or reality of the mind is always there, and with regard to emptiness, there's no difference between the emptiness of the mind of sentient beings and then those of the omniscient Buddhas. But the final potential for attaining Buddhahood is within ourselves, which is called the natural lineage or the Buddha or Buddha nature. So in other words, all sentient beings have the final potential for that of attaining enlightenment, omniscience. And therefore it says all sentient beings are endowed with this Buddha nature all the time. So in other words, the material for Buddhahood is within ourselves. It's all there. So it depends on our efforts to attain that goal. So as followers of the Buddha in the different countries of Asia, like Korea and so forth. So here we have the Koreans as the main disciple for this teaching. And then we have Vietnamese, Chinese, and Mongolians. And then the republics from the Russian Federation, Buryatia, Kalmykia, and Tuva. So these northern the places in the northern region of the world. So I met some Inner Mongolian people earlier. So one of my main teachers was from Inner Mongolia, Kumatup Chognyi. So in these countries, Buddhism is not something new, newly spread, but it has been the traditional religion for over 1,000 years. So I usually say that the Buddha is the sun of Asia. So almost all the Asian countries, the Buddha's teaching has spread in almost all these Asian countries. So as people's the power to investigate into the nature of things increase, the intellect increase, then people tend to pay more attention to the teaching of the Buddha as well. And so, as traditionally followers of Buddhism, from the Buddhist point of view, we should feel that we are very fortunate to have been born in places where the Buddha Dharma has spread and where the Buddha Dharma permeates the whole of the area we live in. And so the profundity or the specialty of the teaching of the Buddha must be understood through the understanding of philosophical assertions or ideas. And therefore, of course, we can keep our faith in the teaching, and also recite texts like the Heart Sutra, but that's not sufficient. Just having faith alone is not sufficient. What we lack is that of study of the teaching of the Buddha, considering the teaching itself as some kind of intellectual subject as well. So modern scientists, of course, has done lots of research on mind, the emotions, and in terms of psychology, and it's still developing further. But in Buddhism, we have a very profound and also detailed explanation of emotions and states of mind. And so the Buddha Dharma must shine through the understanding of these philosophical assertions and ideas. That must come can happen through study of the Buddha Dharma. Therefore, I would like to urge you to pay more attention to studying the teaching of the Buddha. I myself, whenever I have spare time, I still read books on the scriptures and study the teaching. And therefore, I would like to urge you to study the teaching of the Buddha and understand that merely doing prayers and worshipping to the Buddha and so forth will not be sufficient. And therefore, it is important to go through the process of the triple process of hearing or studying, reflection, and meditation. Because when we talk about doing meditation without knowing anything on what we want to meditate on, you cannot do meditation. And therefore, you need to reflect on the teaching. For that, you need to go through study and listen to the teachings. And so through you who are here, I would like to send the message to others as well in your respective countries that it's important, as Buddhists, it's important for us to do study. So please pass on this message to your friends back home. And so we are doing the 3-day. We have been doing the 3-day teaching to the Korean devotees, and then from today, after the teaching, you will disperse to different countries and places where you came from. But although physically we may separate, we will still be together in spirit. And so I will never forget you. And so in your mind also, you should keep this spirit of being together. And so don't forget. So, teaching of the Buddha, on the whole, is for attaining liberation, nirvana. The main emphasis of Buddhism is that of attaining Buddhahood. So usually I say that the terms Mahayana and Hinayana are not good, because that gives some kind of idea of discrimination, or looking at the one as inferior to the other. And instead of using these terms, I usually call Pali and Sanskrit traditions. So the Sanskrit tradition also must have the Pali teaching or tradition as its foundation. So the Pali tradition was in the beginning given to the five first human disciples, Kuncha Kodinaya, the omniscient Kodinaya, and so forth. And then on the basis of the first sermon of the Buddha, we have the Pali tradition. So in the beginning of our teachings like this, I feel it very good to have the recitation in Pali, because the Pali tradition came first in the Buddha's teaching. And then, as Buddhism developed further, the scholars used Sanskrit as the medium of communication of the teaching of the Buddha. And then in the Nalanda tradition also, the Buddhism spread very widely, and the Sanskrit was used. The essence of the teaching of the Buddha in the Sanskrit tradition is Bodhichitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment, within which we have the aspiring bodhicitta and then venturing bodhicitta. And so we are going to do the ceremony for aspiring bodhicitta. Master Tsongkhapa has said that bodhicitta is the foundation of all the great practices of bodhisattvas. And therefore, the bodhisattvas regard or consider this the cultivation and the practice of bodhicitta as the core of their practice, the heart of their practice. And so, in order to reach enlightenment, the omniscient bodhicitta is the foundation. Without bodhicitta, you cannot achieve it. If you have bodhicitta, you will be able to achieve omniscient state of Buddhahood. So this is the bodhicitta is the foundation of the highway, or the yardstick of the great vehicle. It is the foundation of all the bodhisattva practices, such as those of the six perfections and so forth. So even if you may have developed the wisdom of emptiness, but without the help of bodhicitta, you will not be able to eliminate or overcome the cognitive obscurations. Although you may be able to do away with or abandon that of the negative emotions, the mental afflictions. So bodhicitta is like the gold elixir to those of the accumulations of merit and wisdom. And it actually is that factor which gathers the huge amount of merit and wholesome practices. And so, when you cultivate bodhicitta, it is done with the intention to or help all sentient beings. And therefore, the bodhisattvas consider the cultivation and development of bodhicitta as the core of their practice. And so when you are altruistic, you will have peace of mind that in turn helps your physical health as well. And so you will have good health. As Master Shantideva says in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it will lead you from blissful states to blissful states. He says that which sensible person would feel discouraged to ride the horse of bodhicitta, which leads one from bliss to bliss. And therefore, when you have this determination, the inner strength of bodhicitta and the courage, you will also go to the length of making such determinations as to become a varieties of sustenance for sentient beings, like those of the elements. And then you will also have this determination to work for sentient beings as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain. Until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. And at the end of the 3rd chapter, he makes this prayer. Today, in the presence of all the saviors, I invite the world to be guest at the festival of this final the Tathagatahood, and in the meantime, that of the temporary goal. May gods, demigods, and all be joyful. So, with regard to the practice of bodhicitta, it has the foundation of morality, ethics. So, because the temporary and the ultimate happiness come on the basis of or in dependence on sentient beings, if you think well, the sentient beings who are as infinite as the expanse of space, when we actually think of them to benefit them, it is very powerful. So, the source of our temporary and ultimate benefit comes on the basis or in dependence upon sentient beings, and therefore you should be able to look at sentient beings and consider them to be your friends and not enemies. And therefore, as Bodhisattva Charyavatara says, the Buddhahood, of course, comes through the blessings and inspirations of the Buddha, but half of that goal, the final goal, resultant state, comes in dependence upon sentient beings as well. And therefore, why do we venerate the Buddhas but not sentient beings? Shantideva says. And when we develop bodhicitta, this genuine spirit of altruistic spirit of enlightenment, then everything and everybody will actually look positive to us. And therefore, today we are going to do the aspiring bodhicitta ceremony. So for that, the Lama himself must be someone who has the bodhisattva vows. I did especially that of the self-entry or self-initiation, and took bodhisattva vows. I do take bodhisattva vows on a daily basis, but especially today I did. The ritual for bodhicitta. So when you take Bodhisattva vows, Bodhisattva vows does comprise of 18 root downfalls and 46 secondary infractions. So the main practice is to consider others, cherish others over oneself. If you can do that, the rest of the precepts of bodhisattvas can be kept without a hindrance. Lobsang. Lobsang. Excuse me. So there is a tradition of taking the Bodhisattva vows in front of an image of a Buddha. And so I did that earlier. So here, imagine the Buddha Shakyamuni to be Buddha himself in person. Master Tsongkhapa says, I, a monk following the teaching of the Buddha, pay my respects to him. So you should have faith and conviction in the teaching of the Buddha, and which you have. So here, imagine the Buddha himself in person and surrounded by Maitreya, Bodhisattva Maitreya, Avalokiteshvara, Samandabhadra, and Vajrapani and so forth. In other words, the 8 close Bodhisattva disciples around whom Nagarjuna, Asanga and Vajrabandhu. In other words, the masters of the lineage of the profound view lineage, and the extensive contact lineage. In other words, all the lineage lamas or masters. And also you may imagine and visualize the deities of the Tantric Mandala deities. And here we should actually be able to make a distinction between the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha and the specialized teachings. So with regard to perfection of wisdom teaching, for example, perfection of wisdom, it was given to people with pure karma, but it still comes under the category of general structure of teaching of the Buddha, whereas Tantra is specialized teaching. So Tantric teachings were given to very specific disciples, And the general teaching of the Buddha was given by the Buddha and himself appearing in monastic robes. Whereas, except for few, but where the Buddha appeared in the form of a bhikshu, monk, but most of the tantric teachings were given by the Buddha himself arising into the main deity of the mandala. And so these teachings were not given in the general kind of a public. So Nyengon Tsongkhapa was the one who has made this distinction between the specialized teaching and the general structure teaching. So he was a very great master. He may have lived about 2 generations ago. So he has used these terms, general structure and tailored or specialized teachings. So I interpret him to mean that the general structure teachings referred to is a reference to the Sutrayana, and the Tantra is those of the specialized teachings. In China, and of course, in China, tantric teachings also spread, such as the Vajradhatishwari. This seems to be quite prevalent practice in China and also Japan. When I was in Japan one time, they showed me some a bell with different forms of deities on top. So they have the prevalent practice of Vajradhatishwari, and so there is this common practice of Tantra. So Tantra is a specialized, specially tailored teaching for specific disciples. Whereas in Tibet, people have considered or even talked about Tantra being very profound, and therefore most of the monasteries and nunneries in Tibet have tantric rituals or do tantric rituals, but I don't know how much understanding they have of the Tantra. Without really knowing and understanding the general structure teaching well, you cannot actually understand the profundity of Tantra itself. So without, for example, understanding of emptiness, there's no way you can actually arise in the form of the deity within the meditation on emptiness, whereby the perceived object transforms into the deity. So, in other words, with regards to the selflessness, both tantric, the selflessness of persons and phenomena are come in the tantric practices. So, in other words, in any kind of tantric ritual and practice, we have to meditate on emptiness, and from within that state of emptiness, then you transform into a deity. And therefore, in order to practice this specially tailored teaching, specialized teachings for specific disciples, there is you, without having the understanding and the experience of the general structure teaching, there's no way you can do that practice. And so, within the tantric practices, there are those of the practices for extensive, extending one life span and so forth, and also the peaceful practices, and those of the wrathful, and subjugation. So these are meant to be practiced by qualified disciples. So without having the foundation of bodhicitta and this view of emptiness, there's no way you can actually do tantric practice. So I don't feel comfortable to use this term, the lineage of blessings of the practice. So the main practices that we should do is the bodhicitta and the view of emptiness. Apart from this, there isn't some separate practice which we call the lineage of the blessings. So therefore, here, around the 8 Bodhisattva disciples, you imagine the Master Nagarjuna and Asanga for the profound and the extensive lineages. And then, traditionally, in the past, we have these 6 ornaments and 2 supreme masters. But on top of that, I have added 9, including Buddha Palita, Chandrakirti, Viveka, Shantideva, and so forth. And so, because these writings of these masters are the ones which we study, and then you should imagine those of the Nyingma masters of the Nyingma lineage, and beginning with those of Master Padmasambhava, Abbot Chandrakshita, and the King Tisong Detsen, and also the Kadam tradition and Jonang. So in other words, lineage masters of the Sakya, Gelo, Kagyu, and Nyingma traditions, as well as Jonang tradition, and also because the Korean Buddhism spread from China to Korea, you can imagine and visualize Tangsan Lama Xuanzang, who spread Buddhism from India to China, and other Chinese masters, and also you may imagine the past Korean masters of the teaching, and then those who have come from countries like Japan, Vietnam, and so forth. You should also imagine the past masters who have spread the teaching of the Buddha in your land, and also those who have kept or preserved and promoted this tradition in your lands. So I am like a messenger here of the Buddha, the kind and compassionate Buddha. So we should say the 7-limb practice first. Whether we go through some ritual or not doesn't matter, but we should think so remembering and the great qualities of the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas and these great masters, make your prostration. So that's the first limb. The main offering that you can make to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Gurus is your practice. Of course, you can make offerings of material things. So even if it may be a very short moment, when you generate and cultivate bodhicitta and the view of emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness, that could be also used as offering of your practice. So when you do these practices on a daily basis and leave imprints of them in your mind, those become the source of your practice, offering of your practice. So far in our life, we have let ourselves be carried away by the negative emotions and then created the unwholesome actions. So many of them, even in dreams. And so all these which have happened through our undisciplined mind, these negative emotions, and because of this, you actually cause ruin to yourself and others, temporarily and in the ultimate sense. And so, from the depths of your heart, repent your negative actions. So that's the third limb. And then next is rejoicing. So the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have become enlightened and reached the high states of spiritual development through their practice. And they were not enlightened or highly realized without doing any practice. So these so whether it's the past Buddhas or the present Buddhas, they have actually looked up at the past Buddhas and tread along the spiritual path to enlightenment and omniscience and became enlightened. And then what they do is serve other sentient beings. And so we should rejoice in their great deeds of helping all sentient beings. And then next is requesting the Buddhas to teach the Dharma. So in order for us to eliminate our ignorance, we are requesting the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma. So what we have now with us are those of the teachings of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha, and the commentarial treatises. So these are the ones we have access to. And so if we really mean by what we are praying for, to teach, which is asking them to turn the wheel of Dharma, we must actually read these texts. So if we have, for example, suppose we have a vision of the Buddhas and masters like Nagarjuna and so forth, and ask them to turn the wheel of Dharma or to give us teaching, they may tell us, I've written these texts, there are these books, but you are not studying them. So these great, the classics or the great treatises must be studied by us. So through this study, then we should also, by engaging in the process of studying, listening to the teachings, reflecting on them and meditating, then we actually practice the teaching. So the past masters have left their teachings for us. So, in other words, what we are praying also for is that their teachings may survive longer, continuously. And so, the masters from whom we can actually receive teachings directly, and we should also pray for them not to pass away, and also to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas not to pass away. And then, having done these practices, whatever merit or wholesome actions we may have created must not be used or for the well-being in this life alone, or welfare and wealth and so forth, long life, for this life alone, in this life alone, but we should dedicate them for attaining Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, the infinite number of sentient beings across the expanse of space. And so with these in mind, with having done the 7-limb prayer, please kneel on your right knee for the Bodhisattva aspiring Bodhichitta ceremony. It's okay. For those of you who have bad knees or bad legs, you may keep sitting. So just as I have explained, so the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas whom we are visualizing, so there's no greater teaching that they can give apart from the teaching on bodhicitta and the view of emptiness. So this self-cherishing attitude that we have should be transformed into that of cherishing others. Should be switched with cherishing others over oneself, and you should intend to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, and also see that whatever there are, all these things that you see around yourself, the actions and so forth, are like illusion, like a dream, and nothing whatever has any essential, independent existence. So, please repeat these lines after me. So, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas before us are the teachers to us for the practice of taking refuge. And so their experience of the Dharma within themselves is their actual refuge. So the actual refuge comprises of true cessation and the true path. The path referring to the understanding of emptiness, insight into emptiness. So the Buddha is regarded as the teacher, and the actual refuge is the Dharma. So for us, whom we look up at are those of the great masters like Nagarjuna and his disciples and followers. And so who actually studied the teaching of the Buddha, integrated them into their own mind stream, and realized the teaching within themselves. And so these are our Sangha. So we actually make the determination that we will train ourselves in their footsteps as well. And so we take refuge in the three jewels first: the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the actual refuge, and the Sangha as our assistants. And then you confess your wrongdoings and then rejoice in the merits of all beings. So even if you wish to fulfill your own interest there's no greater factor than bodhicitta. And to fulfill the wishes and desires of others also, there's no greater factor than bodhicitta. And so in this text that we will go through, we will say, in order to fulfill the aims of oneself and others, I shall develop the mind of awakening, or bodhicitta. Having developed the spirit of higher enlightenment, I shall invite all sentient beings as my guests. So, considering all sentient beings as your guests or your friends, and not discriminate against some, considering them to be your enemies. So even those who harm the Dharma and sentient beings are actually the objects of our compassion. And therefore, you consider all sentient beings to be your guests. And then say, I shall delightfully enact the supreme enlightened conduct. Which means that you are going to follow this bodhisattva practices, such as the 6 perfections and so forth. And then, so this supreme, delightful, enlightened conduct, which brings only benefit, and which also induces great delight and courage, inner strength within yourself, which doesn't cause any inconveniences to oneself and others. So therefore, this bodhicitta or the bodhisattva practices are the delightful, supreme enlightened conduct. So for the temporary and ultimate benefits of sentient beings, you say, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So, with these in mind, please repeat, I seek refuge in the 3 jewels. I confess each wrongdoings individually. I rejoice in the merits of all beings. I take to heart the state of Buddhahood. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and Supreme Assembly. In order to fulfill the aims of myself and others, I shall develop the mind of awakening. Having developed the spirit of higher enlightenment, I shall invite all sentient beings as my guests. I shall delightfully enact the supreme enlightened conduct. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Please repeat for the second time. I seek refuge in the 3 jewels. I confess all wrongdoings individually. I rejoice in the merits of all beings. I take to heart the state of Buddhahood. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. In order to fulfill the aims of myself and others, I shall develop the mind of awakening, having developed the spirit of highest enlightenment. I shall invite all sentient beings as my guests. I shall delightfully enact the supreme enlightened conduct. May I become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So at the end of the 3rd repetition now, you are going to develop or generate that of the aspiring bodhicitta. So when you say, I shall delightfully enact the supreme enlightened conduct, you are saying that you will engage in all the bodhisattva practices correctly. So which is to try to achieve the interest of others. So the Bodhisattva vow or precepts comprise of 18 root downfalls. As we say in the 6th session Guru Yoga, so not praising oneself and despising others and so forth. So you develop bodhicitta, and having developed this aspiring bodhicitta, then when you make the pledge that you will engage in the bodhisattva practices and say, I shall delightfully enact the supreme enlightened conduct, may I become Buddha, then you are taking the bodhisattva vows. So pray at the end of the third repetition, when you say, may I become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, as I have done the self-initiation earlier and taken the Bodhisattva vows, imagine that you have received the Bodhisattva vows just as the one I have generated. So repeat, I seek refuge in the three jewels. I confess each wrongdoings individually. I rejoice in the merits of all beings. I take to heart the state of Buddhahood. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. To the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. In order to fulfill the aims of myself and others, I shall develop the mind of awakening. Having developed the spirit of highest enlightenment, I shall invite all sentient beings and my guests. I shall delightfully enact the supreme enlightened contact. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So today my life has borne fruit. I'm born into this perfect human life. So having been born in a country, Buddhist country, you have so far, although you may have been born in a Buddhist country or place, you have not been able to pay attention to the Dharma. So now you have actually made this human life something meaningful. And so, having generated the Bodhichitta, you also have to feel that you have some duty to perform, which is to help others and not to cause or tarnish this Bodhichitta. So though we are overcome with all kinds of negative emotions and karma, but when you generate bodhicitta within yourself, this bodhicitta is like a tree which gives you shelter while you are fatigued on the path of samsara. So there is no greater factor to accumulate merit and purify your negativities. This bodhicitta is like the great sun dispelling our ignorance, and it is the butter churned from the milk, from the ocean of the milk of Dharma. So please sit down. So with this, we're done with the Bodhicitta ceremony, and it's almost 10:30 now. So the main disciples for this teaching this time are our Korean brothers and sisters, Dharma brothers and sisters. I have given introductory teaching on the teaching of the Buddha. So by doing the practice of the Dharma, I have already explained how much benefit you can draw from it. And so tell your friends, all your friends, to have a good, warm heart. So my first commitment that I have is to promote love and compassion Because if we are compassionate, then we will not be abusing others, and there will not be wars and battles, killing one another. And so, even the scientists today say that the basic human nature is compassionate. So the reason is because we are social beings. And to survive as individuals, we have to depend on the community. And then, right from the beginning of our life, we are actually nurtured by our mother's love and care. And then my second commitment is religious harmony, bringing harmony among the religious traditions. And then third commitment that I have is the wisdom knowledge that we have received from India and preserved them so far is something that can actually benefit the whole world. So during these few days, what I have been teaching you is something that I studied since my childhood, this Nalanda tradition, the knowledge and wisdom tradition that we have received from Nalanda, which I have shared with you. So this is also something that is beneficial to the whole world. And so you should be able to also tell your friends that the Buddhist tradition that the Tibetans have is something that can benefit the whole world. And then my fourth commitment is to revive the ancient Indian wisdom knowledge in modern India. So whether you call yourselves my disciples or, in other words, my Dharma brothers and sisters, keep these in mind and try to help the Tibetans. So earlier, His Holiness was reciting these lines from Bodhisattva Charyavatara, 3rd chapter, in order to further increase it from now on. Those who with discernment, who have lucidly seized an awakening mind in this way, should highly praise it in the following manner. Today, my life has borne fruit, having well obtained this human existence. I have been born in the Buddha family, and now am one of Buddha's children. And thus, whatever actions I do from now on must be in accord with his family. Never shall I disgrace or pollute this noble and unsullied race. Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of rubbish, likewise, by some coincidence, an awakening mind has been born within me. It is the supreme ambrosia that overcomes the sovereignty of death. It is the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty in the world. It is the supreme medicine that cures the world's diseases. It is the tree that shelters all beings wandering and tired on the path of a conditioned existence. It is the universal bridge that leads to freedom from unhappy states of birth. It is the dawning moon of the mind that dispels the torment of disturbing conceptions. It is the great sun that finally removes the misty ignorance of the world. It is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of Dharma. For all those guests traveling on the path of conditioned existence who wish to experience the bounties of happiness, this will satisfy them with joy and actually place them in supreme bliss. Today, in the presence of all the saviors, I invite the world to be guests at the festival of this, the final attainment of Tathagata.